You won't believe what I had to do just to get into my own property. One moment, I was just a regular guy trying to live a quiet life on my little ranch at the edge of a suburban neighborhood. The next, I found myself drawing up blueprints for a full-blown fence maze. Not for animals, not for fun, but to teach a lesson to a certain someone who thought she ruled the entire block. She wasn't my neighbor, not technically, but she acted like she owned every inch of land her eyes could see. The kind of person who walks around with a clipboard, a permanent scowl, and a deep hatred for anything that doesn't fit her community standards. It all started innocently enough. Me driving home from town, a few bags of feed in the back, hoping to enjoy a peaceful evening. But then I saw it. A silver SUV parked sideways across my ranch gate like a barricade. No emergency, no breakdown, no apology. Just parked there like it belonged. And standing nearby, arms crossed, was her. Karen. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You can't make changes to the fence without HOA approval." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. My ranch isn't even inside the HOA's territory, but she wasn't joking, and she wasn't moving. That was just the beginning. I tried being polite. I tried explaining. I even tried getting the sheriff involved. But when reason fails and entitlement digs in, you've got to get creative. And that's exactly what I did. If she wanted to play games with my property, then fine. I'd make sure she played a game she wouldn't forget. So I built something. Something absurd, legal, and completely satisfying. This is the story of how Karen got stuck in the world's pettiest maze. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac, the tyrant of trash bins, the overlord of lawn lengths. Even though my ranch sat just outside the jurisdiction of the HOA, that didn't stop her from patrolling the area like she was running for sheriff of a town that never asked for her. Every morning, she'd walk the neighborhood with her little notebook, jotting down infractions like mailbox paint fading or garden gnome too whimsical. People mostly ignored her, rolled their eyes when she passed by. But for some reason, she had it out for me from the beginning. The first time we met, she knocked on my door, not with a friendly hello, but with a printed copy of some HOA regulation that had nothing to do with my land. "We're trying to maintain a certain aesthetic," she said, eyeing my barn like it was an eyesore, like it didn't belong within a mile of her precious subdivision. I reminded her politely that my ranch existed long before the HOA was formed, and I wasn't part of their agreements. But that didn't matter to Karen. In her world, the rules applied to everyone she could see from her kitchen window. Over time, her intrusions escalated. She left passive-aggressive notes on my fence. She filed complaints with the county, none of which went anywhere, because I wasn't violating anything. Still, she kept trying. She complained about the smell of horses, the dust kicked up by my gravel road, the sound of roosters crowing at sunrise. Once she even told a local delivery driver that he couldn't come down my driveway because this is a private community. It wasn't. I soon realized Karen thrived on conflict. She didn't want peace. She wanted control. And when she couldn't control me through letters or complaints, she started showing up in person, arms crossed, phone in hand, ready to escalate. The final straw came when she blocked my gate with her SUV, standing beside it like a security guard on a power trip. That's when I knew. This wasn't just a neighborly dispute. This was war. And if Karen wanted to play dirty, she was about to learn just how creative country folks can get when you mess with our land. It was a Wednesday afternoon, one of those quiet days when everything seemed to be running smooth. I had just gotten back from town with a trailer full of hay bales and a plan to unload, feed the horses, and settle in for a peaceful evening. As I turned the corner and approached the long driveway to my ranch, I saw it. Her silver SUV was sitting sideways across the entrance to my gate, like it was placed there on purpose. It wasn't just pulled off to the side or parked badly. It was a deliberate blockade. I tapped my horn, expecting her to rush over, maybe say she was lost or had car trouble. But no. Karen stepped out of the vehicle like she was stepping into a courtroom, lips pursed, arms crossed, eyes burning with that righteous fire only she could conjure. "You can't go in," she said, chin raised, like she was issuing a royal decree. I blinked, confused, and asked what she meant. She gestured toward my newly stained front fence and said, "You've made modifications. That's a violation." I told her again, for what felt like the 100th time, that my property wasn't under HOA rule. It never had been. But she shook her head. "It's about community standards," she said, as if her opinion carried the weight of law. I explained, patiently, that I owned the land outright, that I followed county regulations, not her clipboard fantasy. But she didn't budge. Eventually, I had to call the sheriff. When the deputy arrived, Karen was all smiles, acting like she was just there to chat with a neighbor. She claimed she hadn't realized she was blocking the gate. He gave her a warning, told her to move the vehicle, and she complied. But not before giving me a smug little smile, like she'd gotten her point across. I thought maybe that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A few days later, she did it again. And again, every time with a different excuse. Just checking on the fence. Thought I saw a loose animal. Needed to talk. Each time she stayed a little longer, made herself a little more of a nuisance. It was clear she was pushing, testing how far she could go. And every time I had to stop what I was doing, call the sheriff, and watch her walk away like she owned the road. That's when I realized she wasn't going to stop, not unless I made her. By the third week, it was no longer just an annoyance. It was a pattern. Karen had turned my ranch gate into her personal protest zone. She wasn't just blocking access anymore. She was making a statement, staking a claim, like this was some turf war and I was the one intruding on her territory. Every time I tried to drive in or out, there she was. Sometimes sitting behind the wheel, sometimes standing by the fence pretending to be on the phone. Other times just loitering, arms crossed, wearing that same smug expression like she was waiting for a medal for community service. It didn't matter that the sheriff had already warned her, twice. It didn't matter that I had started recording each incident on my phone. Karen was beyond reason. She believed so deeply in her imaginary authority that no amount of logic or legality could crack through. One day, she even brought a folding chair and planted herself beside the gate like a security guard at a rock concert. "Just monitoring," she said, eyes darting toward the fence posts I had recently replaced. "We've had complaints." Then came the night that changed everything. I returned home a bit late after dark, and there it was, her silver SUV parked in front of the gate again. But this time, it was empty. No Karen in sight. I waited. 10 minutes, 20. I called her phone. No answer. I called the sheriff's office and explained what was happening. By the time a deputy arrived nearly an hour later, Karen still hadn't shown up. When he ran the plates and confirmed it was her vehicle, he shook his head and sighed. "I'll file a report, but unless you tow it, which you technically can't without a posted sign, there's not much we can do tonight." The next morning, the SUV was still there. I spotted her walking toward it in her robe, coffee in hand, like she was returning from a casual neighborhood stroll. When I confronted her, she acted offended. "I was afraid to go home last night. You've been aggressive," she said with a dramatic tone, as if I'd done something other than ask her to move her vehicle. That was it. That was the moment something clicked. She wasn't going to stop because she didn't have to. Not yet. But if she wanted to play games with where she parked, then I'd give her a game. One that only I could win. That night, I sat on my porch, sipping coffee and staring at the spot where Karen's SUV had been parked just hours earlier. I was done playing defense. I'd tried being civil. I'd tried the legal route. Nothing had worked. She wasn't afraid of rules. She thought she was the rule book. And when someone like that crosses the line over and over, sometimes the only language they understand is one they never expected. That's when the idea hit me. If she wanted to treat my property like her personal parking lot, then maybe it was time to give her a parking experience she wouldn't forget. I pulled out a notepad and started sketching. It started off as a joke, something just to entertain myself. A winding fence pattern, a series of tightly spaced panels that spiraled inward. But the more I drew, the more real it became. It was perfect. Not malicious, not destructive, just inconvenient. Brilliantly inconvenient. I would build a fence maze, a legal one, on my land, using materials I already had, and I wouldn't touch her truck. I'd simply build around it. The next morning, I ran the idea by my buddies, 2 ranch hands and an old friend who worked in construction. When I laid out the plan, they stared at me like I was nuts. Then they started laughing. Then they started helping. We measured the exact footprint of where Karen had been parking and marked it off. I double-checked property lines. Everything we did would be within my legal rights. No encroachment, no contact with her vehicle. Just a maze of sturdy wooden panels built with surgical precision. I ordered fresh lumber and dug out extra fence posts from storage. Over the next few days, while Karen went about her usual patrols and HOA duties, we quietly prepared. Panels were pre-cut and staged behind the barn. We built hinges, reinforced corners, and even installed one gate at the far end, just one exit. But that gate would remain locked unless someone knew how to navigate the narrow path through the twisting corridor of fences. For extra fun, I painted a wooden sign and stashed it for the big day. In bold letters it read, HOA Escape Challenge, Property Edition. I wanted the message to be clear. This wasn't vandalism. This was satire. And unlike her attempts to harass me, it wasn't actually violating a single code. The plan was set. The only thing left was to wait for her to pull the same stunt again. And when she did, when she parked there one more time, all smug and entitled, I wouldn't call the sheriff. I wouldn't argue. I'd just grab my hammer, gather the team, and build a masterpiece of petty genius right around her precious SUV. The trap wasn't about revenge. It was about sending a message. This land isn't yours to bully, and you just got outmaneuvered by a rancher with a sense of humor and a lot of fence posts. The morning she parked there again, I knew it was time. I had woken up early, sipping coffee like usual, when I looked out the window and saw her silver SUV already stationed right in front of my gate. Same spot, same angle, same attitude. I didn't even need to see her to know she was nearby, probably inspecting something or fake talking on the phone to look official. But this time, I didn't get angry. I didn't roll my eyes. I simply smiled, finished my coffee, and called the crew. Today's the day, I said. Let's build it. Within the hour, the trucks rolled in. Lumber, drills, posts, all ready and waiting behind the barn, just like we'd planned. We worked in silence at first, focused, efficient. It wasn't even about Karen anymore. It felt like an art project, a challenge, a team effort to outwit the unwittable. Each fence panel clicked into place with satisfying precision. We didn't damage a thing. Her SUV sat there untouched, not a scratch, while we built a wooden labyrinth around it. The structure took shape fast. We used pre-assembled corners to speed things up, cutting only where needed to fit the odd turns. The maze wasn't complicated if you had the layout in your head, but to an outsider standing at her car door, it would look like madness. Fence lines zigzagged, some ending abruptly, others looping back on themselves. and at the far end, barely visible unless you really searched, was a small gate with a lock, my gate. By mid-afternoon, we were putting on the finishing touches when Karen finally came into view. She had a grocery bag in one hand and her phone in the other, probably planning to drive off after whatever nonsense she'd been up to. But then she stopped. Her face froze as she took in the scene. Her vehicle encased in a wooden maze that hadn't existed that morning. She didn't say a word at first, just stared. Then came the eruption. "What is this?" she shouted, marching up to the nearest panel. "You can't do this. This is illegal. You're trespassing on my space." I calmly approached, wiping sweat from my brow, and said, "This is all on my property. You left your car here. We just made sure it didn't wander off." I handed her a copy of the county's property map and highlighted boundaries. She didn't look at it. She was too busy dialing the sheriff. When the deputy arrived, he gave me a long look and sighed, like he already knew what kind of day it was going to be. But after hearing both sides and checking the boundaries, he turned to her and said, "Ma'am, you parked on private property without permission. He hasn't damaged your vehicle. There's nothing illegal here." That was the first time I saw Karen speechless. She wasn't just boxed in by wood, she was boxed in by her own entitlement. And the best part? The game had only just begun. Karen didn't just lose her temper, she lost her entire sense of control. After the sheriff made it clear that nothing illegal had taken place, she stood there, flustered and red-faced, unable to process that someone had outmaneuvered her so thoroughly, without breaking a single rule. Her SUV sat in the middle of my fence maze, like a shiny monument to her arrogance, and for the first time in weeks, I felt completely calm. She paced along the wooden walls, tugging at panels, yanking at hinges, looking for some weak point she could exploit. But we'd built it solid. Everything was bolted, secured, and reinforced. It wasn't meant to hurt anything. It was meant to hold something, and it was doing that beautifully. Karen stormed back to her car, threw the door open, started the engine, and tried to back out. She turned the wheel left, dead end, right, another wall. Straight back, nowhere to go. She tried a few more angles, then gave up and just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring out the windshield like she was in a dream she couldn't wake up from. I leaned against the post nearby, sipping lemonade like I was watching a summer play. A few neighbors had come by at this point, drawn by the commotion. Some stood quietly, others snickered. One guy, Bill from 3 houses over, whispered, "This is better than cable." Karen finally stepped out again and tried to reason with me. Her tone had shifted, from rage to desperation. "Just take it down. This is ridiculous," she said. "You've made your point." I nodded thoughtfully. "I did, and I will take it down," I said, "as soon as you admit what you've been doing and promise to stay off my property for good." She scoffed, muttered something under her breath, and stomped off toward her phone again. Another round of calls, another 30 minutes of drama. But there was nothing anyone could do. She had walked into this one herself, and the world was watching her squirm. Eventually, after what must have felt like the longest afternoon of her life, she broke. Not loudly, not with tears. Just a short, sharp sigh and a reluctant nod. "Fine, you win," she muttered. I unlocked the back gate and let her walk the maze path herself, turning corners, doubling back, shuffling slowly until she finally reached her car. It took her 10 full minutes to navigate out, careful not to scrape the sides. When she finally rolled down the gravel drive and sped off, a small cheer went up from the few onlookers. I didn't gloat. I didn't wave. I just turned around and started dismantling the maze, one panel at a time. The message had been received, loud and clear. This wasn't about revenge. It was about standing up to someone who thought they were untouchable. and seeing Karen boxed in by her own ego was more satisfying than any argument could have ever been. The days after the maze incident were quieter than I'd experienced in months. Karen's SUV didn't return. No more patrols, no more passive-aggressive stares, no more blocking the gate. It was like someone had unplugged her battery. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers, of course. Word got around fast, about the fence maze, the showdown, the sheriff's verdict. People I barely knew started waving as they drove by. A few even stopped to say they were glad someone had finally stood up to her. A week later, I heard through the grapevine that the HOA board had called an emergency meeting. Apparently, several residents had filed formal complaints about Karen's behavior, not just toward me, but others as well. Her misuse of the HOA's name, her confrontational attitude, and her tendency to act like she was in charge of things far beyond her reach had finally caught up with her. The board didn't kick her out, but they suspended her from her position and issued a strong public reminder about the limits of HOA authority. I took the opportunity to install a new gate. This one had security cameras, reinforced locks, and a big sign that read, "Private ranch property, no HOA jurisdiction." Just below it, I added a small tongue-in-cheek addition, "No SUV parking zone." Most folks laughed when they saw it. Karen didn't come to see it herself. Since then, life on the ranch has been back to what it should be: peaceful, predictable, mine. I've got enough going on without neighborhood drama, and I didn't set out to be the guy who built a fence maze around a car. But sometimes, when polite no longer works, you have to get creative. And if that creativity just happens to make the whole street laugh, well, that's just a bonus. They say good fences make good neighbors, but sometimes good fences make unforgettable lessons. I never wanted conflict. I didn't set out to teach anyone a lesson. All I wanted was to be left alone, to live peacefully on my ranch without being harassed by someone who mistook authority for entitlement. But when someone keeps pushing, when they ignore your boundaries, literally and figuratively, sometimes you have to stand your ground in a way they'll never forget. What happened with Karen wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about being petty, even though, yeah, it was pretty funny. It was about reclaiming my space, my time, and my right to be left in peace. It was about reminding people that respect goes both ways. You don't get to impose your rules on others just because you've convinced yourself that you know best. And when you cross the line over and over, don't be surprised if someone finally draws it in wood and nails. If there's a moral to this story, it's this: never underestimate the quiet ones. The people who smile and walk away might not be weak. They might just be patient. And when they've had enough, they won't yell or scream. They'll build a fence. So here's to all the folks out there dealing with their own Karens, wherever they might be. Stay calm, stay smart, and when the time comes, don't be afraid to think outside the box, or build one around the problem. If you've got a story like this, I want to hear it. Drop it in the comments. And if you enjoyed this wild tale of boundary setting and creative problem solving, make sure to like, subscribe, and stick around. Because out here on the ranch, there's always another story waiting to be told.